School bully picks on a black girl, shocked when her dad is Vin Diesel. A school bully attacks Vin Diesel's adopted daughter, and he has no idea who he's messing with. He thought she was just another quiet black girl. Easy to target, easy to break. But what happens when the loudest voice comes from silence? This isn't just about bullying. It's about what happens when arrogance meets legacy, when power meets grace, and when a reckless teenager picks the wrong girl to humiliate. Stay with me because this story, it doesn't end how you think. It begins with disrespect and ends with a downfall. Some people walk into your life like they own the place. Others walk in so quietly you don't even notice them until it's too late. Maya Williams stepped off the bus in silence. Her steps were light, but her spirit, that was heavy. She gripped the straps of her backpack, not to hold the weight of her books, but to steady herself against another day of being the new girl. This was her fourth school in 3 years, not because of behavior, not because of grades, but because life, for some black girls, comes with storms others never even see. And sometimes the only thing you can do is move, just to breathe again. Clearview High was just another building in Houston. Another place she'd try to disappear into. Another place she'd pretend not to exist. But that's not what fate had planned. This wasn't the kind of school where things were earned. This was the kind of place where things were owned. Owned by the football team. Owned by money. Owned by legacy. And the one who thought he owned everything was a boy named Bryce Carter. Bryce stood near the lockers like he'd been carved from the brick itself. Lean, confident, arrogant, his posture said, "This is mine." His eyes said, "You are." He was the kind of boy who learned young that power didn't come from kindness. It came from fear. His family had money, his friends had muscle, and his mouth, it had destroyed more reputations than he could count. People didn't laugh because he was funny, they laughed because they were scared not to. And then came Maya, brown-skinned, quiet, wrapped in modest clothes and a mystery that made people stare a second too long. She didn't flirt. She didn't try to fit in. She didn't even flinch when the hallways swallowed her whole. To someone like Bryce, that made her a target. She didn't bend, so he'd try to break her. It started with a shoulder bump, hard enough to scatter her books across the floor, soft enough for him to pretend it was an accident. But Maya knew. She had met kids like him before, arrogant, entitled. Dangerous not because of fists, but because of what they could make others do for them. Bryce hovered above her as she picked up her books. "Well, well," he said, with a voice dipped in syrup and sharpened at the edge. "What do we have here?" Maya looked up slowly. Her eyes didn't widen, her breath didn't hitch, she just stared. And in that stare, Bryce saw something that made his jaw clench, not fear, but stillness. The kind of stillness that unnerves predators. "I don't think I've seen you before," he said, folding his arms like a statue guarding a throne. Maya said nothing. She stood, brushed past him, and walked on. And that silence stung worse than a slap. Bullies don't just hate resistance, they don't understand it. Bryce wasn't used to being ignored, so he grabbed her backpack, not to hurt her, just to remind her who was in charge. She stopped, turned. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, barely above a whisper. It was the kind of voice you don't hear unless you're listening. The kind of voice that warned, not now but soon. Bryce laughed. His friends laughed, but the laughter sounded forced now. Like something rehearsed too many times and losing meaning. That was day one. But day two would break the rules. After school, Maya waited at the curb. The Houston air shimmered on the blacktop. Bryce approached again, cocky, smiling, taunting, but Maya smiled too. A smile with a secret tucked behind her lips. Because as she pressed a button on her phone, the roar of an engine cut through the laughter. A Dodge Charger pulled up, black, low, breathing power, and from behind the tinted window stepped out Vin Diesel. The laughter stopped. The whispers started. And Bryce shrank. He didn't run, but he didn't speak either. Because when the shadow of someone who's truly powerful falls over you, you either stand or disappear. And Bryce, he disappeared into his own fear. Maya didn't brag. She didn't explain. She just looked at him, smiled, and said, "Still think I'm weird." The next morning, Maya walked into Clearview High, her back straight and her heart still. But the air, it had changed. Eyes followed her now, not with cruelty, but with curiosity. Whispers curled through the halls like smoke. People weren't sure what they had seen, but they had seen something. Bryce Carter, the boy untouchable, had been made small. And Maya, she hadn't even raised her voice. He sat at his usual post by the lockers, arms crossed, flanked by his boys. But his smirk didn't quite reach his eyes. And when Maya walked by, silent, steady, and unshaken, he said nothing. That silence was louder than any insult. Because the moment the crowd starts questioning the king, his throne begins to crack. Power doesn't die quietly, it lashes out. It humiliates, it claws for the old feeling of control. At lunch, Maya moved through the cafeteria carrying her tray with quiet grace. That's when one of Bryce's boys stuck out a foot. She stumbled. Just enough to make noise, just enough to make the wolves grin. But Maya didn't fall. She caught herself, straightened her tray, and looked down at the grinning jock Ryan with something that cut deeper than any comeback. Pity. "I didn't realize cavemen still existed," she said flatly. The cafeteria burst into murmurs. Some laughed, some gasped. But Bryce, he clenched his jaw. He was losing control, and he knew it. By the end of that school day, Maya found her locker wide open. Books spilled across the floor. Markers had painted crude words on the metal. It was meant to embarrass, to provoke. But Maya didn't flinch. She bent down, picked up each book slowly, calmly, stacking them in order. She didn't look around for sympathy. She didn't cry. She simply shut the locker and walked away. No words, no drama, just dignity. Bryce stood across the hall, watching, and what he saw scared him. Because for all his loudness, all his games, he couldn't touch her center. She was built different, and it was beginning to show. That night, Maya sat at the kitchen table, the air quiet and cool. Vin Diesel leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching her like a father who knows when not to speak. "They trashed my locker today," Maya said finally. Vin raised an eyebrow. "That's their big move." She gave a dry laugh. "For now." He nodded. "So, what's yours?" Maya stared at the wood grain on the table. Her voice came low, steady. "I'm going to let him dig his own grave." Vin smiled. "A real one, the kind you give someone when you see they've grown up a little more than yesterday. That's my girl." The next morning, things had shifted again. People weren't laughing anymore. They were watching, some with respect, some with unease. Bryce had been the storm, but Maya, she was the quiet after the storm, and that quiet was changing everything. When Maya walked past Bryce's table at lunch, he called out loud enough for everyone to hear, "Still crying about your locker, princess?" The room hushed. Maya didn't stop walking, but her voice, light, calm, cut through the air. "You keep bringing up my dad like you didn't almost piss yourself when he pulled up." The silence hit harder than any punch. Bryce's face turned dark, and everyone saw it, the beginning of his end. That afternoon, Maya walked toward the parking lot. She knew he'd be there, waiting, and he was, alone, leaning against his car, arms crossed like he was still trying to believe the story hadn't changed. "I just want to know one thing," he said. Maya raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "Why don't you fight back?" She thought for a moment, shrugged. "Because I don't need to." Bryce scoffed. "That's not how it works, people like me, we push." "People like you, you either push back or get run over." Maya stepped closer, lowered her voice. "Or people like me wait. We let people like you push until everyone sees you for who you really are, and by then." We don't need to lift a finger. You're already buried. Bryce blinked, she walked away, and for once he didn't follow. 2 days later, Maya stepped into school and felt it immediately. The eyes, the whispers, the shifting energy. And then she saw it, a crowd at Bryce's locker. Dozens of screenshots taped to the metal, his private messages, his comments. His DMs, racist jokes, sexist slurs, mocking words about students and teachers, time-stamped. Recent, cruel, the truth was out. His power based on fear, on silence, was unraveling in full daylight. And Maya, she stood across the hallway, arms folded, watching. Bryce's voice cracked with rage. You did this. Maya tilted her head. Did I? You think this makes you better than me? She stepped forward. No. It just shows everyone who you really are. And this time, when he stormed off, no one followed him, not even his boys. That evening, Maya slid into Vin Diesel's car in silence. He looked over, one hand on the wheel. It's done, huh? She nodded. It's done. Vin studied her. You didn't even throw a punch. She smiled. Didn't need to. They drove in peace. For the first time in a long time, Maya felt something ease inside her. Not just because the bully was gone, but because she had won her way, with dignity, with silence, with truth. The school moved like nothing had changed, but it had. Maya walked the halls as if they were hers now, not out of arrogance, but out of quiet understanding. She had seen something collapse and knew she didn't have to lift a finger to destroy it. The air around her felt clearer. Students looked at her differently now, not with pity but with curiosity, with a touch of respect. Bryce, meanwhile, was unraveling. He sat slouched in the back of class, no longer the center of laughter. His jokes hung in the air like wet paper. His boys had fallen silent too, unsure how to navigate a world where their leader was no longer invincible. Maya didn't gloat. She didn't speak his name. She let the silence do all the work. At lunch, she took her usual spot by the window, the sun casting soft gold across her tray. For the first time in days, her shoulders relaxed, but her eyes were still sharp, still alert. A black girl didn't get to relax for long in places like this. Dignity came with cost. She caught the glance of a younger girl nearby. Shy, barely 13. Hair in braids, eyes wide with wonder. The girl whispered, "You're the one who stood up to him, right?" Maya smiled gently. "No, I'm the one who waited until he stood up to himself." Bryce sat in the counselor's office, his jaw tight. He wasn't used to being questioned, not like this. The counselor leaned forward, her voice firm but calm. "Do you deny the messages on the locker were yours?" His voice cracked. It was a joke. They weren't funny, Bryce. He looked down. For the first time, he saw how small his words looked on paper. Maya walked past that office window on her way to class. She didn't stop, but her pace slowed just enough. She didn't need to see his face to know what it looked like. It was the face of a boy realizing he had built his castle out of dust. At the next faculty meeting, his behavior was reviewed. The school couldn't ignore it anymore. Not with screenshots printed and posted. Not with students murmuring and parents calling. And in classrooms across Clearview High, conversations started about race, about cruelty, about how long the silence had lasted before one black girl broke it by not even raising her voice. Back home that night, Maya lay on her bed, the ceiling fan spinning slow above her. She wasn't thinking about Bryce anymore. She was thinking about every time someone had told her to keep her head down. Every time her mom had whispered, "Don't make a scene, baby, just get through." But that wasn't what she had done. She hadn't stayed invisible. She hadn't caused a scene either. She had caused a shift. Vin knocked on the door frame. "You good?" He asked. She nodded. "Yeah. You did something not a lot of people can do, kid." "What's that?" You made the truth louder than the lie, and you didn't even have to scream. She sat up. Her voice was soft but clear. I didn't want to win. I just didn't want to lose like they expected me to. Vin smiled. You didn't lose, Maya. You showed them what unbreakable looks like. The next week, something unexpected happened. Maya sat at her usual table when a girl from the cheer team approached her. Jasmine, someone who hadn't so much as looked Maya's way before. Jasmine stood for a second, fidgeting. Then said, "Can I sit with you?" Maya nodded slowly. Sure. They sat in silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was quiet, yes, but respectful. Soon after, another student came. A boy Maya remembered seeing in the library all the time. Then another. The table that had once been a quiet island began to grow. No one said it aloud, but something had changed. And it started because one girl didn't flinch. Bryce had become a ghost in his own kingdom. He still walked the halls, but people didn't part for him anymore. They watched him now, not out of awe, but judgment. A teacher who once looked the other way now handed back his paper with no smile, no leniency. Try harder, she said, and it stung more than she intended. He tried to joke again in class, but the room stayed still. No laughter. No loyalty, just quiet disappointment. Reputation didn't vanish all at once. It leaked out of the cracks until there was nothing left but silence. And silence, for Bryce Carter, was unbearable. One morning, Maya placed something on the principal's desk before homeroom, a letter. In it, she didn't name names. She didn't demand punishment. She wrote about dignity, about how young black girls are told to shrink in spaces that were never built for them, about how even when they're right, they're told not to stir trouble. She wrote, I didn't want power, I wanted peace. But I learned that sometimes peace doesn't come from avoiding the fight. Sometimes it comes from surviving it. She signed the letter not with her name, but with one word, Unbreakable. Weeks passed. Bryce kept his head down, his jokes dried up. His boys drifted to new crowds. Maya didn't become popular, that wasn't the point. She became respected, not because of who her father was, but because of who she was. She started tutoring after school, helping younger black girls find their voice. She joined student council, not to lead the school, but to listen to the kids who'd never had a voice in the first place. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was a seed, and it was growing. Black girl becomes symbol of strength in a broken system. By the third week, Maya had become more than a girl with a secret. She had become a symbol, a quiet presence that reminded people what dignity looks like under pressure. In literature class, they studied Maya Angelou, Still I Rise. Maya sat by the window, sunlight streaking her cheekbones, the words sinking deep in her bones. She raised her hand to read. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I'll rise. The class was silent. No one dared interrupt. Even the teacher swallowed before she spoke again. After class, a younger student slipped her a folded note. It read, You helped me believe I matter, thank you. Maya held the paper to her chest like armor. The bully faces consequences when the truth comes to light. Bryce was called into a disciplinary hearing. It wasn't a dramatic affair. No shouting, no cameras, no fists flying. Just a boy in a chair, stripped of his throne, sitting before a panel of educators with files thick with evidence. He tried to explain, said he didn't mean harm, that he was just messing around. But the weight of his words, the screenshots, the names, the patterns, spoke louder than any apology. When the verdict came down, it was quiet, suspension, counseling, leadership privileges revoked, varsity position gone. And when he walked out of the room, he wasn't just lighter in title, he was smaller in spirit. He passed Maya in the hallway that afternoon. Neither of them said a word, but this time he didn't try to stand taller. He just kept walking. How a black girl's grace shifted an entire school culture. The whispers didn't die, they changed. People started talking differently. Teachers began asking different questions. Someone suggested a new diversity committee. Another teacher printed out a quote from Audre Lorde and posted it outside her door. The poster read, "When we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak." But Maya never shouted. She let the silence convict, let the truth unravel in the light, and sometimes that's all it takes. She wasn't just the girl who didn't break. She became the girl who changed the room without raising her voice. Vin Diesel's daughter finds her own voice without his shadow. At home, Maya leaned against the kitchen counter as Vin dried a pan. "You doing okay with all this?" he asked. She nodded, arms crossed. "I thought it'd feel like a movie ending." Like applause or something, Vin smirked. "Yeah, real life's not big on soundtracks." She looked at him. "People keep talking about you. But that's not why any of this happened. It's not why he backed off." Vin put the towel down. "They'll always look at me first. That's just how it is. But you know what I see when I look at you." She raised an eyebrow. Someone who didn't need my name. Someone who carried her own. She didn't smile. She breathed. And it felt like the first full breath she'd taken in weeks. The moment Maya realizes her power comes from within. It was raining the morning she found herself alone in the music room. No one else around. Just her, a piano, and the weight of everything she had survived. She pressed a key. Soft. Low. Then another. The sound echoed off the empty walls. Her hands danced slowly, then faster, then stopped. In that silence, she whispered to no one but herself, "You're enough." She had been waiting to hear that, not from a teacher, not from Vin. Not from some crowd, from herself. Because truth is, no one had ever really protected her before. Not schools, not systems, she had done it. She had survived in a place that wasn't built for her, and she wasn't just still standing. She was rising. Black girl turns pain into power, one step at a time. Spring arrived like a quiet promise. Maya walked into school with no fear on her face. She wore her natural hair that day, full, soft, haloed in morning light. The same kids who once mocked girls who looked like her now said nothing. Some even nodded. That alone spoke volumes. She passed a flyer in the hallway for a student council open seat. She paused. And for the first time, she tore off a tab. She didn't want power for control. She wanted it to protect, to make space, to hold the door open for the next quiet black girl who just wanted to exist with dignity. The bully watches the girl he mocked become a leader. Bryce sat near the back of the auditorium. It was a small student meeting, nothing official, no ceremony, but Maya stood at the front reading something she'd written, her voice calm, her posture upright. He watched her with a knot in his throat. She didn't even glance at him. He wasn't her focus anymore. He wasn't even part of the story, and that hurt more than anything. Because the worst thing you can do to a boy who lived for attention is give him none. And she had mastered that like art. The final test, when the system tries to silence her again. A teacher pulled her aside one afternoon. "You're becoming quite the presence in this school," he said, smiling politely. "But I want to remind you, don't make this about race. Keep things inclusive." Maya blinked. "Sir, being black isn't exclusive." He paused. That smile faltered. "I just mean we should focus on unity, not division." She stared at him. "Calm, still, I'm not dividing anything. I'm naming what's already here." Then she walked away, not in anger, in purpose. Because the most powerful thing a black girl can do isn't argue, it's to refuse to shrink. How one quiet girl sparked a quiet revolution. By the last month of the semester, a mural was commissioned by the school. They asked for student submissions. Maya didn't draw it, but someone else did. It showed a black girl standing alone in a hallway. books in her arms, chin lifted. Behind her, shadows of all the girls who had ever stayed quiet pushed down, passed over. In front of her light. When it was unveiled, the students clapped. Some louder than others, some stayed quiet. But every eye in the room went to Maya. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She just looked at the wall and nodded once. The girl who didn't need saving, only space to rise. It was the last day of school when Maya stood outside the building, watching the buses pull away. Vin pulled up in the same black Charger, window down, one arm resting on the wheel. He smiled, ready. Maya tossed her bag in the back and slid into the seat. Yeah, I'm ready. As they drove off, she looked out at the school fading in the mirror. You know, she said, I used to think I had to be rescued. Vin glanced at her. And now? She looked forward. Now I know. I just needed room. Years later, the girl they tried to break returns as a voice of strength. The building hadn't changed much. Clearview High still stood with its brick-and-mortar confidence, as if time couldn't touch it. The front lawn was still trimmed to precision. The hallway windows still reflected the sky like nothing had ever happened inside. But inside those walls, a memory lived. And today, that memory had come home. Maya stepped out of the car alone. The wind carried a chill, not cold, but sharp, like it wanted her to remember where she'd been. She wore a long wool coat, her curls full and free, her presence grounded. There was no nervousness in her stride, only purpose. She was older now, maybe mid-20s, but the way she held herself spoke of lessons learned in silence and scars turned to armor. This time, she wasn't the girl trying to disappear. She was the woman invited back to speak. Inside the auditorium, light filtered in through high windows, dust particles dancing in the air like secrets long released. Folding chairs filled the space. Students leaned forward in their seats. Teachers stood along the back wall, some older now, some new. At the center stage stood the podium, simple, wooden like before. And above it hung a banner, Clearview Justice and Leadership Forum, stories that shape us. Maya waited backstage, heart steady. She ran her thumb over the paper in her hand, not because she needed notes, but because it grounded her. A familiar voice broke through. You ready, Maya? She turned, Ms. Green. Wrinkles framed her smile, but the warmth hadn't aged a day. Maya nodded. Been ready for a while, just waiting for the right time. Ms. Green smiled. Then take the room. Maya stepped out to the microphone, her heels soft against the stage wood. The room settled. Some students knew her name. Others only the myth, the girl who had brought down the school's golden boy with nothing but silence and dignity. She scanned the crowd. Most of you don't know me, she began. But once I sat where you sit, I was quiet. I had transferred schools more times than I could count. Not because I got in trouble, but because trouble always found girls who looked like me. The room fell still, breathless. I believed that if I made myself small enough, maybe the world would forget to hurt me. But that never worked, not once. She paused, letting that truth land. One day I stopped shrinking. I didn't yell, I didn't swing, I just let someone show who they really were. And I let silence speak what I couldn't. She told the story about Bryce, about the jokes, the locker, the whispers, and how she had walked through all of it without needing to shout. I didn't win because of who my father is. I won because I remembered who I am, and that changed the room. Heads nodded. A few students whispered to one another. A teacher wiped their glasses, not because they were dirty, but because her voice had cracked something open. Maya looked around the room. I don't need you to remember my name. I need you to remember this, when the world expects a black girl to disappear. Her very existence becomes defiance, her grace becomes protest, and her silence can move mountains. The applause didn't come in one wave. It came in ripples, slow, then rising, because it wasn't about celebration, it was about understanding. After the talk, a girl approached her. Small, maybe 15. Skin the color of warm mahogany, braids, shoulders tense like she'd spent too long trying to fold herself into corners. "Miss Maya," she whispered, "my sister talks about you. She was here when it all happened." Maya smiled softly. "What's your name?" "Janelle." She nodded. "You're not invisible, Janelle, even when they try to make you feel like it." The girl's eyes filled. "I'm scared." Maya leaned in gently. "Good, that means you care, but don't let fear shrink you. Let it sharpen you." Janelle nodded, clutching a notebook tight to her chest. As the sun began to dip behind the school, Maya stepped outside into the fading light. The sky was streaked with gold and plum, warm and soft. A breeze lifted the edges of her coat, and there, waiting near the curb, was that familiar sound, low, steady, unmistakable. The black Dodge Charger idled like a hum beneath the earth. Vin stood against the hood, arms crossed, watching her with that same quiet look he'd always had. A father who didn't need to say much to say everything. She walked toward him slowly, not like a daughter needing a ride, but like an equal returning from battle. He didn't speak right away, just let her come close. Then he said, voice low and steady, "You stood up there like you, Dee, always belonged." She met his gaze, calm and full. "I think I finally believed it." He nodded once, then opened the passenger door for her, not like a chauffeur, but like a man honoring royalty. She slid into the seat. He closed the door behind her with reverence. When he got in and started the engine, he didn't drive off right away. They sat in the fading light, the silence thick with understanding. Then he said, "You didn't just make them listen, Maya. You made them think. That's something not even fame can do." She looked out the window at the building, its outlines soft in the dusk. "I didn't come back to finish anything," she said. "I came to plant something." He nodded. "And did you?" She breathed in deeply, the engines growl beneath her like a heartbeat. "I think something's already growing." He shifted the gear, and as the car rolled forward, his voice followed low and steady. "Damn right it is." Not every victory ends in applause. Some end in whispers, in notebooks clutched tighter, in girls who stand a little taller the next day. This is how change works. One silent act of courage at a time. One choice to stay instead of shrink. One truth spoken softly but carried forever. Because in a world built to ignore her, a black girl's quiet refusal to disappear is the loudest thing in the room. And maybe that's what we all need to remember. That strength doesn't always come with shouting. That dignity isn't about dominance. Sometimes the greatest power lies in quiet courage, in the choice to keep walking when the world tries to make you small. Let Maya's journey remind us, black girls don't need to be rescued. They need to be seen, and when they are, they don't just survive, they lead, they rise, they change everything. If this story moved you in any way, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Black Unbreakable, and leave a comment sharing what part touched you most. And stay close, because in the videos to come, we'll continue to share powerful true stories of Black resilience. Stories of injustice, perseverance, and victory. Stories the world has tried to forget, but that you will never be able to ignore again. The next chapters are coming, and they will leave you speechless. See you soon.